Thank you. Hello. I'm going to be on a leash, so I'm not going to be moving very much. I really urgently need to update my bio because it's clearly been more than a decade now. And actually, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So hi, I'm Vera. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be back in Holland. I'm part of Field. We're a design studio, digital art studio. We don't really care what you call it. We first set up the studio in London. Now we're also in Berlin since 2 years. And we mainly create commissioned artworks for brands. We're about 25 people in these 2 locations, working together as one team, which means we're on the phone a lot. Everyone's from different backgrounds, and somehow everyone is good at more than one thing, which is brilliant. So a lot of people are working in CG, motion design, procedural animation, code, programming, interaction design, sound, photography, and very importantly, a few very good producers. About half of the work that we do is spatial, experiences, really large-scale installations and interactives, but always with a very strong visual expression. We don't really do interactives where the visual content is not from us, so to say. And we always do that with the ambition to create something that is sensorial, that communicates on kind of a human and emotional level, which sometimes is good to remind yourself about when you're working with technology. At the very heart, really, we are image makers, so that's kind of the other half of our projects. And we're taking a very systematic approach to image making. Coming from generative design, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. We're designing a behavior that becomes characteristic, becomes a visual system, and then also allows to become a visual language that can constantly change, be alive and react, and be analytical at one moment and then be expressive at other times. A lot of the stuff that we do somehow ends up visualizing something that is invisible by nature. Can be the energy of the moment captured in an image, can be the complexity of a machine learning algorithm. And in fact, it is often technology that is bringing a lot of these new complex narratives into our world and into our lives that are quite hard for people to find access to. As designers, we like working on a certain level of depth and not just scratching the surface. And really start by gaining an understanding of the subject matter that we're dealing with, and then express or translate even that understanding into images that are more accessible to others. We do that on commission, but also in independent, self-commissioned works. It's really about like finding and creating and inventing new metaphors that people can relate to, and often that is what makes it universal, the fact that it's a visual thing and it's working without words or without language. So, that was a sales pitch. I have a lot of practice in that. But today, I actually don't want to talk about that. I don't even want to talk about the aesthetics of the future or whatever placeholder title I put into the thing when I had to submit the paperwork. You will get to see some of our work, a lot of it actually, but I'm planning to venture into the past a little bit. I hope you've all eaten well and you're up for some story time. And I'll tell you what's on my mind these days. I'll be jumping around between a few different thoughts, but for me they are really interconnected, and I hope that works for you too. So please forgive me when it's not completely shaped into clear thoughts. I started the studio together with Marcus, this guy. This picture is not quite as old, but we started 11 years ago. We've been working together for like 15, 16 years, and he is one of the best digital artists I know. I look after the whole logistics, even though I'm also a designer by training. And last summer was our 10-year anniversary. And as anniversaries go, they make you a little bit nostalgic. You start pondering, where did we start? Where did we come from? Why am I still here? Is it ever going to get easier? I don't know. But I spent a lot more time than in previous years thinking about the ideas that we started with and which ones of those stayed, which ones disappeared and then resurfaced with a different meaning or a different significance, kind of trying to hold on to the things that maybe actually stayed for that whole journey. Marcus and I met in art school in Kassel. It's not one of the famous ones, more one of those that actually leaves you to own your own devices, which can be a good thing, can be very daunting when you're young. For myself, this being left alone meant that I attended a design course, and I also finished a design course, but I actually wanted to be, and also worked as, a producer and a curator in media arts. That's what took me to Rotterdam, actually. I worked for V2 for a while. And in Kassel, I probably spent more time organizing parties and performance nights for the local film festival than I spent at school. In fact, the visual identity for this series of events was one of the first projects that Marcus and I ever did together. That was around 2005, 2007, and in graphic design and visual communication, what we were studying, the most exciting thing, the thing of the time that you could get involved with, obviously, was technology and code and software. And we wanted to use code to make graphic design come alive. Not a compression issue. This is actually PAL resolution. If you open it on your desktop, it's like this big. I feel very old when I say that. I'm not that old. And these ideas actually became our thesis we graduated with, and the foundation for Field as a studio. The idea of reinventing, of enriching visual communication through the use of technology, creating aesthetic systems, and designing with interactivity, with generative processes, and with artificial intelligence, which was not really a topic in design or image making at that time. And this is, by the way, little detour why we're called Field. We drew this little map, and it had visual communication at the center, because this is what we always wanted to stay with. But we wanted to pull in influences from all sorts of directions. Visualization methods, the way of thinking, a structural way of dealing with color, for example, or creating visual patterns and structure, and very importantly, behavior. So there's your field, and the little flags were the projects that we had done at the time. And another little detour, that one, Interim Camp, was also a generative short film that we made with some custom height maps that we generated in a custom tool and then animated in Maya. It's a grueling 13 minutes long. Don't ask me how long that took to render on machines that probably had half of the power of this 5-year-old laptop. But I'm mentioning it because it's a really important point back then for us, that we didn't care whether you would call it design or art, or whether it was just graphic design or anything. We also wanted to make films and narrative formats and storytelling and spatial experience, and for us all of it was one. It's still online. I'm still not embarrassed about it, and I think that in itself is an achievement. So this excitement about what's new, about the zeitgeist, that was a very, very strong motor for us. And at the time, I think zeitgeist was nearly equivalent to novelty. I think a lot of the things we did for quite a few years, we did because they were possible for the first time. And that comes with working with technology, I guess. So because we were excited about new techniques, about new tools, new frameworks that were coming out, and of course also the aesthetics that kind of emerged from working with these new tools, or from building your own tools. And it felt like London was the place to find it, so we moved. That's what we decided. Built a website, went out to talk to people, and a few months later we had our first commission. because we really wanted to see these things in the real world. This was a commission for G.F. Smith. It's a paper manufacturer, and they used to spend a lot of money on these brochures. They made 10,000 copies of these brochures. These paper samples were specialist papers for digital printing, which was the dernier cri of the day. And we created 10,000 unique illustrations for the cover in a generative process. And it's such a kind of picture book example of generative visual design or image making that it's still something that we show very often to clients who haven't been exposed to this kind of work that much yet. You're going to see baby Marcus in this video somewhere. We are really proud of this project back then and still, because it was finally starting to apply these ideas in the real world, even if it was for a budget of £1,000. Legendary, but at least it was real. And the other thing that we wanted, obviously, was to do something that feels relevant. Who wouldn't say they want to do something that's relevant? Or, say they don't care to do something that's meaningless. But how do you actually define that for yourself? And how do you translate that into everyday decisions when somebody calls and wants to do a project with you, and you need to kind of weigh up so many factors, and you only have influence about some of them? So a simple way to define relevance is scale. And maybe that's the first thing you try. Because when somebody gives an idea a huge canvas or a huge budget, then it must somehow be relevant, right? But it's not quite that simple. For us, it meant in the first place to have opportunities. We wanted to work with a larger team. We had ideas that we couldn't build by ourselves. We didn't want to have any practical limitations on the logistics. We wanted bigger canvases and whatnot. So we've always been, throughout the years, working very hard to get bigger opportunities, whatever bigger means. Work with cooler brands, cut out the agencies, work direct client, have more influence, have more budgets to bring really cool people on board. And 10 years later, this is kind of the biggest and coolest visual system that we have did in this realm, and on the largest scale too. It's the visual identity for Think, IBM's flagship conference called Think. That was last year. In fact, we're working on the new one right now. I have to invent our own things again. And it's held at a really, really huge, generic conference center in San Francisco with 40,000 attendees. It's a very generic white space. And when we first got there, we realized, wow, you need a lot of pictures to take over a place like this. So what we designed are 7 visual systems. Each of them illustrates a theme from the work that IBM do. Not just business departments like quantum computing, cybersecurity, but more like themes, resilience, scalability, decentralization, the cloud, all these abstract things, because that's really what they do. They talk about how do businesses need to transform to work with digital technology or in a digital age. So our job was to find metaphors for these things or behaviors that express what that might be in form, in structure, in motion, and in behavior. The 7 systems are quite different from each other because we needed that bandwidth. So they're more a family rather than a really tight identity. And that's why they all connect by forming the word mark at some point. And then each of them has a lot of depth that you can go into. Remember the thing about being organized and expressive and kind of use that visual language for all sorts of scenarios on screen, in print, and in motion.
Every day we produce 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. It is the raw material of our digital society, the most powerful natural resource on Earth. But all the data in the world means nothing if we can't refine it, trust it, and transform it into insight. To see patterns, to anticipate change, and give us the confidence to act.
We have a
very cheesy American voiceover there, but it kind of works. They actually wrote that independently from us, and we didn't know about it either. So, and this was also, just one of dozens of use cases for this kind of material, very kind of felt like a very successful piece. And also in our very latest project that we're just starting to publish, we also came back to this core idea of a visual system. And this time it's for retail interiors. We built a system for Adidas that choreographs a huge database of content from photo and video, code-based animations, kinetic type, into layouts and collages and animations that are always changing. They're generated in the cloud and then downloaded. They're aware of where they are positioned, if you think about this. They have an awareness of these clusters of screens and treat them with different layers of depth. And it's really quite a smart thing. And it's actually rolled out in 2 flagship stores already in Seoul and in London on Regent Street, Oxford Street, sorry. And the identity in this case itself was conceived by Dia. They kind of lay the foundation for it. And then we took it and made it a completely generative thing where most of the things are invented on the fly or made on the fly. And curiously, one of the biggest obstacles in this project was not to pull this off. That's something that we literally could have done 10 years ago, easily. But the biggest headache of it was to integrate and to make our software interact with the existing channels of how Adidas uploads content to their stores worldwide. It's literally like they have a new football campaign or a new women's running campaign, and somebody in Herzogenaurach pushes a button, and everything updates around the world. And obviously, they're not going to give up on that just because some digital artist tells them that they need to dedicate these few $million screens to just brand content now. And this very, very tedious and very technical work of finding a way to interface with that third-party software, which is a commercial setup, is in the end what made it possible. But I'll show you a little video of it first. after drifting almost into the background for a few years, this idea of visual systems is more relevant than ever, but it's still about making it technically possible. It's still about creating something that hasn't been done before. And what I'm thinking about more and more is the question, is novelty, is this kind of novelty, is that a value in itself? And I would say the answer is no. It also has to be good. Because when we're actually getting to a point when we get beyond ideas that are just technically possible for the first time ever, the focus shifts back to the quality of an idea and the execution. We can't keep chasing for world's firsts. A lot of agencies ask us to do that, but it's neither fun nor very rewarding. And I don't think that, with, let's say, technology-driven design and art maturing out of its baby years, that's not gonna work for much longer. And I think it also leads to projects that are just gimmicky and that don't really say anything, and that also age very fast. And to be honest, I think there is a lot of work being done out there right now that is trying to talk about these new complexities about technology, etc., but don't really penetrate underneath the surface of a subject, because maybe there's not enough thinking being done about it, and just creating an effect for a short wow moment. What I think we need to do instead is really spend more time thinking about what we want to bring across, understand before we even start what we're trying to do, and that takes time, and understand the subjects that we're dealing with, because the rewarding thing is that in that spot, as designers and artists, we can actually make a real contribution to even a public debate or reflect on the things that are changing in our world right now. This is a project that we did with Wired magazine. It's a series of illustrations and stills and motion, trying to develop new visual metaphors for 5 machine learning algorithms that were, at that time, 2018, gonna kind of roll out, so to say. For each one, we really went in, studied, tried to find open source libraries that would somehow be representative of one of these classes, so to say, of products and algorithms, and really studied it, visualized the architecture that we could find in the code, and draw from papers, from libraries, and really try to do that homework. This picture, it's actually just half of the picture, is about that newer generation of voice assistants that were coming out, kind of rolling out in phone OSs at the time, who first started to be able to calculate your intent. So quite a groundbreaking thing that changes, it's a step towards these assistants becoming more intelligent and having more influence on your life in a way. Something that humanity should reflect on before we buy it. And as a visualization, we based this on SyntaxNet. That's Google's natural language processing algorithm. So that was kind of a representative element for voice assistants. And you can see the structure of layers as a sound input coming in here. You can see the layers that you know from schematic drawings of a neural network as well. And then you have hundreds of connections on each layer, and they're constantly shape-shifting. And here's another one about generative adversarial networks, 2 networks fighting against each other. Yeah, they made us loop. So the thing that, obviously from these pictures, you can't teach someone how a neural network works, and that's not the point. But you can bring across that these systems are autonomous, they're changing on the fly, they change their own architecture during runtime, that their decision-making is based on probabilities, that in a blockchain the information is stored on different levers, and that's why people say it's democratic. And that is going that one step further than just saying, this is fascinatingly complicated. Because I think a lot of work that is actually out there that represents the cloud or those topics that we can't really grasp yet, they're just saying it's complex and you're never going to get it, but isn't it beautiful? And I think we need a little bit more than that. Yes. Because I think this is the area of design right now where we, our little niche, our industry, can actually make a real contribution for a change. We're not just decorating things. And I think, in fact, as a creative community, we're quite far behind. Because these things are in the world, you know. We nearly have self-driving cars taking our kids to school, and we have AI in our pockets, but we don't have a visual repertoire or a language that helps us talk about these things. And that, obviously, you know, if I put my different hats on, in the commercial world, we're going to need pictures that help us sell these products, that help us or help companies differentiate a brand from another one, you know, when we're even less interacting with the physical devices themselves. But more importantly, I think that also applies to us as a society. We also need to be able to pick people up who don't have a technical understanding and pull them into the discussion and give them an opportunity to actually say whether they want these things or not. And I think that's not really being talked about very much at the moment. And then the other very, very big topic, obviously, most pressing of our time is sustainability, climate change. And there's obviously a lot of issues that come with our own work that I have to be honest, I have no answer about. I don't know whether we're going to be able to do the things that we're doing in 5 or 10 years' time. You know, the amount of power that we use just to render images, even though we're doing a lot of real-time stuff, that also sucks a lot of power. The ridiculous amount of air travel that we do to go to places like this. I came on the train. And also the hardware that we use, you know, and the resources that it uses. So no answers here yet or a solution, but we don't want to ignore these issues. We actually want to pull them very actively into the things that we do and as a kind of parameter of our decision making. For example, by dreaming of new materials that maybe can change their shape, and that's why they will always be useful and they will never end up in the oceans. We're also really fascinated by this new wave of activism that we're lucky to be part of. You know, when I was 20, that kind of stuff didn't happen. And the role that technology and communication and also graphic design plays within it. There's quite a strong aesthetic and graphical language emerging from it. These pictures are from a photo trip, a photo safari, where we played with that aesthetic a little bit in the Californian desert. And at the moment, we're working on a very new artwork that observes in a fairly poetic way how our landscapes are changing through human intervention and through climate change. It's going to premiere, or is premiering, on this huge screen in a new center in Shanghai. And I hope we'll actually be able to go back there soon to document it properly. Hopefully that is going to go well. So for now, I'll just show you a little excerpt. some very work in progress, fresh from the studio. So if I try to pull it all together, then this might be as good as I can pin it down today. Zeitgeist has to mean something more than just novelty. Relevance cannot be just in scale, but it needs to come out of our own interests and our own authorship by setting themes, by actually deciding what we want to talk about and then try and sneak that in everywhere. And if we do that, this authorship thing, then we actually have a real chance to contribute to the current conversation, to have a place in the world, in whatever topic that might be. And to be a political being in the very literal sense of the word. It's a bit too messy to be anything like a manifesto or a guiding principle yet, but it's also anything but a static thing. But having some kind of definition of why we're doing this is something that Marcus and I are always craving very strongly, never have enough time to talk about. But I think the fact that you try to hold on to something just so that you have something that you can change, I think it's the only way for us to take responsibility for the work that we do and to steer what we do and kind of steer our own path. And that's what's on my mind at the moment. Thank you. Minutes early. Do you have any questions? Yes.
So for the Adidas thing, what was the input that people from Adidas give to keep the content up to date with what was happening?
So the question was what the input from Adidas was on the on that retail project. It was quite a collaborative process. So last summer, we started kind of proposing this idea to actually cater for all these big screen clusters in a more intelligent way. At the same time, they had started talking to DIA about what the visual language, what the graphical identity would be, and they had commissioned Stink to create content, photo and video content, that they call evergreen. You know, that's something that goes beyond just a season. It's kind of intended to be around for a couple of years. And also the overall desire was to make that as site-specific, you know, to make it about the city, to make that flagship store more special. And to be honest, from that point onwards, we kind of guided the conversation quite strongly, and also brought all the different parties together, from their IT to the retail teams to that third-party content pipeline, to actually be able to facilitate that. That's, in this case, not something that came from the inside, but that we actually had a chance to sell in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Like,
okay.
Partially, like second part is like, do they have it still in use, and are they like updating it?
Yeah, it's basically it's a system that runs in the cloud. And that generates new videos every day, and those are distributed kind of to the specific screens in Seoul and in London, so it's a permanent installation. There's kind of these takeover moments several times during the day, and in between they play campaign content. We're at the moment planning to roll this out to other flagship stores, and to also make scaled down versions that are more plug and play. So it really is intended as a very powerful tool that can slot into all sorts of different use cases.